Hey, what's going on guys? Today I'm going to try and answer a question I've been asking myself ever since I did this with Oblivion, and it turned out to be arguably my most successful video to date. Can you beat the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim without moving the camera? Probably, but what about survival mode? I actually don't know. To be honest, I don't know Skyrim as well as I know Oblivion. So feel free to leave a comment telling me all the ways that I f***ed up during this run and how I could have done things better. I record my commentary after I complete each section of the challenge, so it's fresh in my mind, so I don't actually know if this is possible yet. But let's go ahead and discuss the rules for this challenge before we get started. Rule 1 is that I am not allowed to move the camera under any circumstances. The game, however, is allowed to do as it pleases. There are certain animations that will force the character into a third person mode, such as ragdolling, falling over, or sitting in chairs. These are completely acceptable to make use of during this run. Rule 2 is that I must play on survival mode at all times, and I am not allowed to change the game difficulty. And rule 3 is that I will be using my PC compatible Xbox controller. This is so that I can't accidentally knock the mouse and therefore move the camera. Everyone clear and happy with the rules? No? Great.
Let's just get through this.
So to start with, I created a high elf character because I intend on using magic for this run.
Captain, what should we do? He's not on the list.
Forget the list. He goes to the block.
Oh, this is total bullshit. I'm not even on the list. You're going to be hearing from my lawyer, you Thalmor loving. Jesus Christ! He's not going to be in the Elder Scrolls 6. So at this point, the game still has control over my character, so all of these movements are completely involuntary. Not only am I not controlling my character, I wasn't even in the room for this. I legit got up and went to make a cup of tea while this was going on. If you can't tell, I'm British, so it's mandated by law. Seriously, I cannot have the king kicking down the door again.
What in Oblivion is that?
What the f*** do you think it is? So it's around this point that I get official control over my character for the first time. I make sure to save here, that way I don't have to go through the entire opening to the game again if I mess this up. So my only objective right now is to make it to Helgen Keep. That means I have to just run past Alduin and everything that's going on. Of course, this is what you do anyway, even if you could move the camera. Now, right at the start, I already got stuck. You see, there's a scene where Alduin will come down, breathe some fire, and then fly away. I normally am already long gone by this point, but I got caught up in the geometry of the map. I know that I have to walk pretty much directly backwards, but I kept getting stuck in all the rubble. Thankfully, Alduin decided to use one of his shouts that ragdolled me. Now this really helped me because once I stood up, I was actually facing a different direction. And this would certainly be enough to allow me to see what I was doing. And finally I was able to make my way to Helgen Keep. I went with the Stormcloaks because f*** the Empire. Ralof cut off my bindings, giving me full access to my inventory. The first thing that he wants me to do is to loot one of the corpses of the dead Stormcloaks. Now it quickly became apparent that I couldn't do this. You see, because I can't move the camera, I can't look down. I tried to jump while engaging in dialogue with him in the hope that it would force my angle down, but it did not. I then tried using a fury spell on him in the hope that I could surrender to him, and hopefully this would change my angle. Whether or not I should have waited for the fury effect to run out, I don't know, but we'll never know. Well, so far we're off to a fantastic start to this challenge. It's 4 minutes in and I've achieved nothing. If you're interested in watching an easy challenge, then buckle up because this is not going to be pretty. I was forced to reload from where I first got control of my character after Alduin attacked. This time I was actually able to make it to Helgen Keep without Alduin knocking me over. This time I decided to go with Halvar and the Empire because, yay, Empire, woo!
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go! Alright!
So following this route I can actually progress because I'm not actually forced to loot anything, the game just suggests that I do. I tried grabbing a sword in the hopes that this would be enough for Hadvar to progress. It was not. However, as soon as I pulled the chain to open the gate, Hadvar came with me. I dual-wielded a flame spell, and unlike other challenges, I was actually able to help with this fight. It makes a nice change to be actually able to help for once. I also looted what little potions and food I happened to be facing at the time, before progressing further. I was a little bit concerned that the game was going to force me to try and pick this lock. However, it didn't. I always assumed that you have to. Once again, I normally just have to wait for Hadvar and the Torturer's assistant to finish off the Stormcloaks in this room. But 1, the Torturer's assistant was not here, and 2, I can actually help. So, while we clear out the rest of the enemies in Helgen, I'd just like to announce the winner of a little competition I made in my last challenge video. I invited you guys to pause the video and guess how I managed to change my angle inside the Mythic Dawn Shrine. And the winner was from Marcus Killer, guessing you used a Ghost Drain Fatigue spell to reorient yourself in the Dagon Shrine. Not exactly word for word, but yes, I did indeed drain my own fatigue and then use a ghost spell to knock me over and reorient myself. Just really want to thank you guys at this point for taking part in that. Didn't really expect anyone to actually do it. It was really nice to hear everyone's feedback from that challenge as well, but I'm going to go into that a bit more at the end. So now that I've escaped Helgen, the first thing I have to do is make sure survival mode is turned on. So survival mode prohibits fast travel, which means I will not be fast traveling during this run. It also forces you to eat, sleep, and try and keep warm, otherwise you will suffer some serious negative effects. So because I can't move the camera, I was kind of just guessing which way I was meant to go, and I immediately got lost. Now this is very bad because I have to reach Riverwood before Hadvar does, and so I had to reload and try again. The reason for this is that I need to speak to his Uncle Alvar while he is outside. And it's also the reason I wanted to go with the Stormcloaks. You see, depending on who you go with will depend on the NPC that you talk to in Riverwood that will give you a few basic supplies. You see, Uncle Alvar always seems to want to go inside to have a chat first, and this could be a problem getting back out again, so I now have to catch him before Hadvar does. So, as luck would have it, I only just managed to get to Uncle Alvar first. However, I wasn't able to talk to him initially. The hitbox for his dialogue was only just in reach, and a second too late and it would have triggered a whole dialogue with Hadvar, and then we would have had to go inside. This would not have been ideal. I managed to get a few supplies from him, which I can either use or sell. I then spoke to Sven for 2 reasons. I wanted to take my eyes off the ground, and there's also a little side quest here involving Sven, Feindal, and Camilla Valerian. Now, they are both absolute creeps fighting over the same girl. However, Feindal has a bow. If I complete this little side quest and deliver a venomous note to Camilla from Sven, then not only do I get a companion, but I also get a companion with a bow. I used the tanning rock to reorient my character so that I could enter the Riverwood Trader where Camilla Valerian is currently located. After I give Camilla the venomous note, I then sold what little supplies I had at the Riverwood Trader before heading upstairs and trying to use the table to turn myself around. This did not work, so I was then forced to speak to the shopkeeper over and over again until I had turned around enough to leave. This is a very long and tedious process, and it really hinders me from going into buildings, which means I will only be going into shops if I absolutely have to. And finally, after collecting Feindal, it was time to head to Whiterun. Now, generally speaking, I hate using companions, both in the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout games. They're extremely useful for challenge runs, but I never use them in casual play. While trying to enter Riverwood, I accidentally fell into the river outside because I can't see where I'm going. Once I did enter Riverwood, however, my default angle already puts me facing Dragon's Reach. I spoke to the Jarl of Whiterun and informed him about the dragon attacks.
There is another thing you could do for me. Suitable for someone of your particular talents?
I'm pretty sure he just tried to solicit me for sexual favours. I spoke to his wizard Farengar, who gave me the quest to go to Bleak Falls Barrow to get the Dragonstone tablet. I then raided the Jarl's kitchen, stealing any meat and produce that I could find. I used Feindal to change my angle so that I could totally clear this room out. I had intended on making some food, but I didn't have enough salt pile right now. And so I sat in the Jarl's throne so that I could turn myself around and leave Dragon's Reach. And once I was back outside, I had no issue getting out of Whiterun. My next job was to head to Bleak Falls Barrow. Now, because I had Faendal with me, I was able to turn my angle as required. I mean, yes, I could just head to Bleak Falls Barrow while running backwards. Eventually, I'd be facing the right direction. But it's just so much easier to see where you're going. I cleared out all of the enemies outside of Bleak Falls Barrow before heading inside. So normally when I do these challenges, the best course of action is to use stealth, but that strategy would not work with a challenge like this. Although I must say it's very rare that I actually have the option to heal, so that was a very nice treat. When this room was clear, I jumped on top of some debris and then spoke to Faendal so that I'd be facing down. This would allow me to use the bed. Now that I was fully rested, I looted one of the bandits that I'd previously killed. They had some really nice fur armor on them, and this is important not so much for defense, but for warmth. You see, one of the difficulties in this challenge will be keeping warm, especially in the northern regions a lot later. I accidentally stumbled into the room where the bandit outlaw normally flips the switch that will kill him with an arrow trap. Because this did not happen, I had to take him out myself. I actually couldn't see the answer to the puzzle either, but I did it off pure memory. I repeatedly spoke to Faendal just before the giant spider fight because I really needed to see what I was fighting. Fire is extremely effective against frost spiders, and me and Faendal took him out in no time. So this next part was extremely annoying and very time consuming, but let me explain. I spoke to Faendal a few times so that I could turn to face Arvil the Swift. I then cut him down and killed him, at which point I took the golden claw. So far so good. Then Faendal and myself continued on through the Barrow, killing any enemies along the way. Oh, just a quick question guys, did you guys know that Faendal is killable? Because I f***ing didn't.
You're a moron.
I was actually more than prepared to let this go and decided to continue through the Barrow on my own, until I came to a gate that can only be opened by pulling a chain that I can't see. I then wasted quite a lot of time working my way back through the Barrow, trying to find different ways of getting through this gate without Faendal. I found a couple of benches that I was able to sit in that would allow me to change my angle to actually get through this gate, which was good. But then I came to a door with a restless Draugr. Now, on my first 2 attempts, I absolutely got my ass handed to me. I actually managed to kill him by luring him into one of the tunnels where I had full view of him to blast him with my flames. But then, wouldn't you know it, I was facing the opposite direction to the door I needed to go through. And so I headed back to the start of Bleak Falls Barrow in an attempt to find something that could turn me around. I even tried using the pressure plate gate, hoping it would knock me over or something, but this didn't work either. I wasted a lot of time trying to do this without Faendal, and it wasn't working, so I was forced to reload to a previous save when he was still alive. I then told him to wait where he was, as I cleared out the entire Barrow of all the Draugr and enemies. Naturally, this was quite difficult, but it was better than not having Faendal at all. Once I'd cleared everything out, I was free to continue with Faendal, and I once again had an NPC to allow me to change my angle. After we made it into Bleak Falls Sanctum, I once again told him to wait while I ran on ahead and cleared out all the Draugr. I cannot risk him dying. Now, the final door with the Dora the Explorer puzzle was a little bit difficult because I can't look up and down. However, with a few well-timed jumps, I was able to successfully turn the rings to what I needed to get through the door. I told Faendal to wait at the start of the room with the Draugr Overlord because I did not want him to get killed. And to be honest, the Draugr Overlord was really quite easy. I began by blasting him with flames, however it quickly became apparent that I was going to run out of magic. So then my strategy became just keep him on fire, using short controlled bursts to keep him ablaze. I'm also certain that Faendal was shooting him from the distance, so this probably helped too. When I had finally finished off the Draugr Overlord, I already had the angle necessary to loot him and the chest. Then there was nothing left to do but grab Faendal and get the f*** out of there. So, upon leaving Bleak Falls Barrow, the first thing I did was return to Riverwood. I used Faendal to help me turn so I could actually see where I was going. Once I was back in Riverwood, I jumped while engaging in conversation with an NPC called Embry. This forced my angle down and allowed me to sleep in one of the bedrolls just outside of Riverwood. I hit level 2 and increased my health, taking the Novice Destruction perk. I then used Faendal to turn my angle again and headed towards Whiterun. Once back at Dragon's Reach, I returned the Stone of Bleak Falls Barrow, only to find that a dragon was now attacking the western watchtower. I positioned myself behind the Jarl and waited for him to finish his conversation. Then when he spoke to me, I would spin all the way around and be facing the exit door. I told Faendal to wait inside of Dragon's Reach and headed toward Bellathor's in order to sell all the junk I'd collected. I had a bit of trouble getting out of a shop. It's not exactly impossible, but sometimes it can take quite a while to do even the most basic of things. I then headed towards the western watchtower. I did not help fight the dragon at all. I waited inside the tower until the guards had destroyed him, and then went out and consumed his soul. As luck would have it, one of the Whiterun guards wanted to speak to me about what the hell just happened. This spun me around and gave me the angle necessary to re-enter Whiterun. After that, I headed back to Dragon's Reach. I used the Arcane Enchanter to disenchant the Axe of Whiterun that I was given. I then used the wait command to wait for the wizard in order to buy a soul trap spell. My next objective was to try and get some food together. I perused the local market as well as the Bannered Mare before renting a room for the night so that I could level up. Even this simple task in itself was a real pain. Constantly talking to NPCs to try and change my angle just so that I can look at a bed. Once I hit level 3, I decided to increase my magicka. However, apparently I forgot to spend the perk. I used Mikkel so that I could turn and leave the Bannered Mare. Then when I left Whiterun, I spoke to the carriage driver a few times, forcing my angle downward. So, let's be real for a second here, guys. At some point, I'm going to have to fight Alduin. And you know as well as I do that I can't kill him without moving the camera. So I'd just like to thank you all so much for watching today. Please like, subscribe. No, I'm joking. I have a plan. And my plan involves repeatedly using Soul Trap on this dead wolf. You see, by doing this I can actually increase my conjuration skill. Power leveling, if you like. The drawback to doing this on survival mode is that eventually I'm going to get tired and hungry. I was using the wait command to regenerate my magicka faster, and eventually I would have to go back and resupply and rest. So heading back, I spoke to the horse seller outside of Whiterun that allowed me to turn my angle to get back in. Afterwards I headed to the Bannered Mare and bought as much food as I could before sleeping to level up again. It sounds so straightforward and easy, but believe me guys, I'm cutting out most of the tedious conversations here. This was absolutely fucking soul destroying. When I finally did get some sleep, I had 2 levels to gain. I increased my magicka and my health. I then took the summoner perk, allowing me to summon Aetronox. I had one more perk, but I thought I would save it for now. I had a plan for that. The next thing that I needed was money. And my plan to get this was to use a wood chopping block in order to get some wood together to sell to get some gold. The only place I knew where to get one right now was at Riverwood, so I decided to head back there. Along the way I found a dead mud crab and thought, hey, let's power level my conjuration a bit more. I made it back to Riverwood only to find that I couldn't actually target the axe to pick it up. So I went to speak to Uncle Alvar to force my angle down so that I could collect the axe. The next thing I would need to do is actually chop some wood. This became an issue because once you finish chopping wood, the camera will reset your angle to a default position, meaning that I was no longer looking down and could no longer target the chopping block.
God fucking damn it!
I then spoke to Uncle Alvar again, which changed my angle so that I could use the workbench to further move my angle to enter the inn. I spoke to Ognar to get some food and spoke to Delphine to rent a bed for the night where I leveled up again. I had to jump up onto the table and then speak to Ognar so that I had a sufficient angle to actually target the bed. Upon leveling up, I increased my magicka and took the Atromacy perk, which doubles the duration of my conjured Aetronox. Getting the hell out of there, I ran all the way back to Whiterun where I collected Faendal. I was going to need him to chop some wood. You see, by commanding Faendal to chop wood instead of myself, my angle would never change, and therefore I could just get him to do this over and over again. I sold the wood and used the money to buy a Conjure Flame Atronach spell. Also, I do apologise, I know there hasn't been a lot of action as of late, but this is a very tedious challenge.
Hey, tell me about it.
I made sure to buy and make as much food as I could before heading off to see the Greybeards. Submitted for your approval. Horses. First off, let me just start by saying that I decided against using horses and reloaded. But I was just curious as to what you guys think about horses. Would I have been allowed to use them? You see, while you're on a horse, you control the character with the left stick. The right stick is completely unnecessary, and the game will automatically move your camera. Now, I did say at the start that I was going to let the game do what it wishes with the camera. However, this feels like a little bit too much of an exploit. So I reloaded and made my way up Hrothgar on foot. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Should I have been allowed to use horses? I decided not to bring Faendal with me up to Hrothgar because I was worried about him getting killed. I now could summon a Flame Atronach, which would easily destroy anything I came across. I tested this against one of the trolls just before Ivarstad. It was difficult, but the job got done. I did have to help my Atronach by using a flame spell to keep the troll on fire, as they do regenerate health. I used Climic to adjust my angle in such a way that I hoped I'd be able to get through the doors at the top of Hrothgar. Navigating the 7,000 steps was far from easy. I would occasionally get lost, however, I was consistently quick saving, and I think for the first time since I ever started doing a Skyrim challenge run, I was actually able to kill the Frost Troll. When I finally did make it to the gates of Hrothgar, I was facing the wrong way, and so I couldn't get in. So I was forced to travel back down the steps until I found an NPC called Karita. Unfortunately, she was sitting down, so I couldn't target her or talk to her. My plan then was to summon a Flame Atronach and then attack it. This would cause my Atronach to become hostile, at which point she would stand up and try and react to what was going on. I then summoned another Flame Atronach. This would end the combat, and she would still be stood up, at which point I could begin to talk to her to change my angle. And at long last make it into Hrothgar. Holy shit, that was a pain. So, after the Greybeards gave me a quick spelling lesson, they wanted me to perform the Whirlwind Sprint Shout. Unfortunately, upon leaving the Hrothgar main building and entering the courtyard, I am stuck with this angle. I cannot turn, and therefore I cannot complete their task. I can't speak to any of them, and I don't have Faendal as well, so remember that, because that's going to f*** me over later. Thankfully this time there is a way around this issue. You see, if you attack the Greybeards, eventually they will fight back. Occasionally they will use a freeze shout on you, which will knock you over, and then when you stand up your angle will be changed. This was not my first attempt. They killed me a few times, but eventually I got the angle I needed to use the Whirlwind Sprint and continue the story. I then used Master Einar to change my angle and head back inside Hrothgar. Once I was outside of Hrothgar, I decided that I was going to scale down the side of the mountain. Now this was not easy because I couldn't always see where I was going. I was having to constantly quick save as well, because I was repeatedly falling to my death. Eventually, I made it into the river. From there, I stayed in the river and followed it along until I found the road. I then caught a Captain Morthal, which was rather difficult to angle my way into. Upon entering Morthal, my primary concern was that I was going to get thrown inside a giant wicker man at any moment. I headed inside the local inn to warm up before using the innkeeper to turn round and leave. Upon leaving Morthal, I was approached by some cultists. I had my Flame Atronach as well as a few of the Morthal guard, so eventually the cultists did die. However, it required quite a lot of healing on my part. Once the cultists were dead, I raided their corpses for anything that I could sell, and began using my soul trap spell on them to improve my conjuration further. I knew that this was a scripted event, and I also knew they'd be coming. I'd planned on doing this in Riverwood just because it's a lot more accessible, but I thought, you know what, screw it, I can just do it now and then sleep in Morthal. I can always come back here if I have to. I slept at the inn to level up, where I increased my magicka, and I took the Novice Restoration perk. I still have one perk left, but I'm saving it for now. A few more tedious conversations later, getting out of the inn and then facing my direction, and I was off to Ustengrav. Now, there is a few enemies outside of Ustengrav, but they weren't really too much trouble for my Flame Atronach. Holy shit, I forgot Faendal.
Are you kidding me?
I was going to see if I could do Ustengrav without Faendal, but I don't even have the angle to get in the first place. Now, while this is extremely inconvenient, it is not unfixable. You see, Solitude isn't actually that far away. Furthermore, I found a secret door into Solitude that I've never discovered before.
Your typical Solitude wench is like the city itself. Stormy exterior, but the charms that lie within.
I'm sorry, but a lot of the men in this game talk like they've never actually seen a woman before.
That's a woman?
There's enough NPCs within Solitude for me to freely roam and talk to anyone should I ever need to change my angle, so I had no issue here selling all of my produce. I did, however, have a lot of trouble getting into this carriage. Sometimes you just can't get the angle that you need. After making it back to Whiterun, I spoke to the horse salesman that gave me the angle to re-enter Whiterun. I then collected Faendal, headed to the inn where I bought some food. I then slept to level up. I increased my health and took the regeneration perk so that healing spells will cure 50% more. Now that I had Faendal, I caught a carriage back to Morthal. After a quick conversation with the courier, a dragon attacked Morthal. At first, I didn't have a clue what was going on because I was looking slightly down. Also, I couldn't hear him. I just knew that NPCs were going crazy around me. Interesting side note, I did not see this dragon at all until it was dead. Faendal and the Morthal guard took care of it for me. I then took the dragon bones and scales because I didn't realise how valuable they actually are. I offloaded all this stuff on Faendal because it was far too heavy, and then finally we travelled to Ustengrav. Okay, so I realised that it's taken an extremely long time just to get to Ustengrav. But things should speed up from here now that you guys have an idea about how I'm navigating and controlling my character. Also, this dungeon feels excessively anticlimactic for all of the trouble that I've gone through to actually get here, because the hard part of this challenge is not the combat. The hard part is just moving around. With Faendal and a Flame Atronach, I was able to smash my way through this dungeon. And I also made sure to collect the Become Ethereal shout. Now, we killed a dragon in Morthal, so I had a soul for that. The next area, though, I genuinely thought was going to be a run ender. You see, there are 3 timed gates that you will have to run through very quickly. Traditionally, the method I use is to use sprint, and then use the whirlwind sprint shout to get through. Unfortunately, however, the gates will close behind me, which means Faendal will be stuck on the other side, and I will no longer be able to use him to manipulate my camera angle. I tried for a long time to get him through to the other side, but it wasn't working, so I just said f*** it and went on without him. Now, as it happens, I was able to make it to the end of Ustengrav and collect the mysterious note without any angle manipulation. Unfortunately though, I couldn't progress any further as there's a switch that I need to hit to get through a door, and I can't see either of these, so I had to reload. Okay, so now we have a problem. I need Faendal on the other side of these gates, but he's not fast enough to get past these gates. So how did I do it? How was I able to get Faendal past these gates? I ran a little competition like this on my last Oblivion challenge and the feedback was absolutely incredible, so I'd like to try it again. So, if you'd like to take part, I invite you now to pause the video and write in the comments your guess about how you think I got Faendal past these gates. Much like in this video, I'll display the winner's comment in my next challenge video. I'll also keep the file footage so that you guys can see how I did it, but I'm actually not going to tell you how I did it in this video. But with Feindal safely on the other side of the gates, there was nothing stopping me from collecting the mysterious note and leaving Ustengrav. Then it was simply a case of running back to Solitude, catching a carriage to Whiterun, and running all the way to Riverwood. You know, honestly, I think if I wasn't doing this on survival mode, I'd have finished it by now. Okay, so you guys know that I can't use Feindal forever. There are parts of this game you have to do alone. Also, I know we've come a long way so far and achieved very little, but I feel like things are going to speed up now. So Delphine wants me to prove to her that I'm a Dragonborn, and so I have to head to Kynesgrove in order to kill a dragon. First, however, I need to offload some of my junk on the local merchants. I then ran to Whiterun and caught a carriage to Winterhold, and normally I come here when I'm actually supposed to as part of the main story, so I was expecting her to just let me in after telling her that I'm Dragonborn. After passing her little test, I made it into the College of Winterhold and spoke to a man called Fintius, who I bought a Frost Atronach from. I had a perk still to spend, so I took the Adept Conjuration perk, halving the cost for Adept spells. So I had to make it to Kynesgrove, which is actually south of here, past Windhelm. I did, however, get stuck in an area next to Windhelm, between the mountainous terrain and one of the walls. Apparently, this is an area you can't get out of. You probably can if you can move the camera, but never mind. By the time I got to Windhelm, I actually froze to death. Luckily, I save a lot. On my next attempt, I found that standing at this exact spot was warming me up. I couldn't see why, but I wasn't going to question it. It wasn't until Feindal turned up that I realised I was standing near a fire. I left Feindal outside the inn in Kynesgrove because I didn't want him to get killed. I then went to fight the dragon with my Frost Atronach and Delphine. Now I know Alduin isn't going to be this easy, but this fight was easy. After we'd killed the dragon and I proved to Delphine that I was in fact Dragonborn, she told me to meet her back in Riverwood. So I went and collected Feindal, headed back to Windhelm, caught a carriage to Whiterun, and then ran all the way back to Riverwood. Delphine then had the great idea to infiltrate the Thalmor Embassy, which, considering the extremely tense political situation at the minute, I'm sure is a fantastic idea if I'm caught. Okay, Delphine, you're gonna need to get out of the way now. No, seriously, get out of the way. Delphine, get the f*** out of my way. So in order to get into the Thalmor Embassy, I first had to run to Whiterun and catch a carriage to Solitude to meet one of Delphine's agents, Malborn the Mule. I call him this because he has to smuggle stuff into the Thalmor Embassy for me, presumably in his rectal cavity. While still at the inn, I bought some food and slept for the night so that I was fresh and ready for the Thalmor Embassy. I cannot take Feindal with me. So, as I've said previously, I don't normally use companions because I think Skyrim is easy enough without them. I say that not to be inflammatory, but I'm currently playing this at the minute. If anyone's interested in seeing any Daggerfall challenges, please let me know in the comments and we'll make something happen. But now back to another really old game. Bethesda, please bring out a new Elder Scrolls. I can't bring Feindal with me for the Thalmor Embassy, which is why I really hope somebody comments so you just used Feindal for the whole run. I'm pretty sure I can't take him to Skuldafn, and I'm almost certain he won't be coming to Sotherngard. But initially, the embassy has enough NPCs to allow me to manipulate my angle. I needed to be looking down so that I could collect my equipment from the chest, but after that I'm on my own. The problem I had now was I couldn't open the next door, and so I summoned an Atronach, which caught the attention of one of the wizards, who actually opened the door and came through to see what was going on. I think I got pretty lucky here because I was actually going to try something else with the Atronach, but we'll get to that. So initially dealing with the Thalmor guards was no issue because I have a Frost Atronach. My plan was to just let the Atronach deal with everything and just repeatedly heal. This worked out very well, and I also already had the angle to enter the courtyard. I once again let my Atronach deal with all the enemies, especially considering how weak to magic I am. Once the courtyard was clear, however, I had a problem. I did not have the angle necessary to get through the next door. And so I tried something. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I thought I might as well give it a try. My plan was to attack my Frost Atronach so that it would attack me, hopefully staggering me. And if I waited by the door, I was hoping it would stagger me, at which point my camera would shake, and then I could repeatedly press A, hopefully selecting the door. Holy shit, it actually worked. I made sure to save, which was a good thing because I immediately got killed the first time. I now had very little health and had to quickly slip past the guards, summon a Frost Atronach, and then heal. I kinda just waited around letting my Frost Atronach deal with everything. Unfortunately, I needed a key off one of the Thalmor agents, but I didn't have the angle to target them, so I couldn't loot them. So once again I used my Frost Atronach to stagger me, and then repeatedly pressed A, hoping I could target the corpses. This allowed me to take the interrogation chamber key, as well as a few items that I could probably sell later on. This next part was extremely awkward and took a lot of figuring out. You see, I didn't have the angle to get through the next door. I used the same technique to loot the chests, getting all the information I needed. I headed through to the dungeon area and killed all the enemies with my Frost Atronach. So this next part was extremely awkward. My plan was to use my Frost Atronach staggering technique to target one of the chairs so that I could sit down. However, you can't when you're staggered. So I used my Frost Atronach to stagger me so that I could leave through a different door to the one I came in. Now that I was back in the previous room and facing a different direction, I was able to crouch and target one of the benches, allowing me to sit down. When I stood up, I turned a full 180 degrees, allowing me to head back through the door that I just came through. This meant I was now facing west inside the interrogation room. This would give me the right angle to allow my Atronach to stagger me so that I could open up the cage with the prisoner inside. Speaking to the prisoner forced my viewpoint downward, which I was going to need later on to get through the trapdoor. When the next set of Thalmor guards appeared, I used my Atronachs to take them out. Because my angle was now facing downward, I was able to loot the corpses without any issue, taking the trapdoor key and getting the hell out of there. I followed the road as best I could, trying to make it back to Solitude, until I found an NPC who I could talk to change my angle. Hey, what the hell is Faendal doing here? I don't know if he was just patiently waiting outside the embassy or what's going on, but he's here now, so I can use him. Making it safely back to Solitude, I caught a carriage to Whiterun and then ran all the way to Riverwood. Reporting back to Delphine with the information that I've learned, she wants me to now go and find somebody called Esburn. This time I actually remembered to collect my equipment from the chest. I haven't done in the past, and it's caused problems. I bought some food and a bed for the night where I leveled up, increasing my health. I also sold all of the crap that I'd collected at the Thalmor Embassy before heading off to Whiterun to catch a carriage to Riften. I thought that by actually joining the Thieves Guild I might have an easier time inside the Ratway. In order to do this, Brynjolf will ask you to pick a lock and steal a ring. Unfortunately, I can't do this because my right controller is disabled, and therefore I can't pick locks. But if you simply just wait enough time, you can just fail the quest anyway and still be allowed into the Thieves Guild. Brynjolf will tell you to go to the Ragged Flagon in the Ratway. Getting through the Ratway was pretty easy because I have Atronachs and Faendal to help me turn. While I was fighting inside the Ratway, my restoration hit level 30. This allowed me to spend the spare perk I had on recovery, making Magicka regenerate 25% faster. Several more conversations with Faendal later and I'd made it into the Ratway. I spoke to Vekel the man who gave me the location of Esburn, now that I'd done the quest for Brynjolf to actually get to the Ratway. Then it was simply a case of smashing through all the Thalmor soldiers inside the Ratway with my Atronachs and reaching Esburn. And once I reached Esburn, I now had 2 NPCs that I could talk to change my camera angle. Not that it really matters because I only need 1. On my way out of the Ratway, I found the corpse of a Nord and thought this would be the best time to power level my conjuration skill, using the Soul Trap spell. Because there's a bed right next to him, I can just keep using Soul Trap and then sleeping to level up. Not only would sleeping regenerate my magicka, but I also have the Highborn ability as a high elf, which will allow my magicka to regenerate very quickly. I was starving by the time I got my conjuration up to 100, but you cannot die from starvation in survival mode. But now I had the Twin Souls perk, which allows me to summon 2 Atronachs, and not just regular Atronachs, but potent ones. Then, after eating a lot of food, I used Feindal to get me out of the Ratway. The only issue I had here mainly was that the Frost Atronach is very tall and will sometimes block passages. I then proceeded to sell all of the armour that I'd collected inside the Ratway to Grelka before catching a carriage to Whiterun. On my way to Riverwood, I got ambushed by a blood dragon, but I had Atronachs and 2 NPC followers, so this was no issue. Then, after reuniting Esburn with Delphine, my next job was to head back to Whiterun to catch a carriage to Markarth. Again, this isn't really too much of an issue, however, it is very food consuming and very frustrating using Feindal to turn all the time. But other than that, I was able to just run into Skyhaven Temple without fighting any of the Forsworn. Esburn, Delphine, Feindal, and my Atronachs smashed through Skyhaven Temple. Getting the correct angle to use the next door of the Explorer puzzle was a little bit awkward. I found that I had to position Feindal in just the right way to speak to him. After a lot more messing around, I was finally able to target the puzzle and make it through to the next area. I performed a blood sacrifice, which allowed me access to Skyhaven Temple, and reached Alduin's wall. Okay, so what happens next is pretty much an absolute mess. And at this point, you guys know that as long as I have Feindal, I can move pretty much without too many issues. But that doesn't mean that everything I had to do now wasn't incredibly tedious and annoying. So basically, I ran back to Markarth, caught a carriage to Whiterun, and then headed up to High Hrothgar. Simple enough. I slept at the Greybeards to level up before learning the Clear Sky shout. I now have to travel to the throat of the world and meet Paarthurnax. This is not an issue, because I have plenty of strong Atronachs, as well as Feindal. After meeting Paarthurnax, he told me that I would need to find an Elder Scroll. I used the Become Ethereal shout to scale the mountain back down to High Hrothgar. I then spoke to the Greybeards and used the Become Ethereal shout once again to make it down the mountain back to Whiterun. Then, after spending a minute or so trying to adjust my angle so that I could actually catch a carriage to Winterhold, the courier pops up. Now, because Feindal hadn't caught up with me and I was sick of using the wagon driver, I used the horse salesman instead to change my angle, finally making it to Winterhold. Once inside the College of Winterhold, I bought a Storm Atronach spell, although I was just shy of the money required, so I had to sell some stuff. I then learned that there was a man in the north who knew something about the Elder Scrolls. I then bought some food and rested up at the inn in Winterhold, as I knew that what was coming next would be extremely long and hard.
Long and hard.
So in order to head north, I would have to make it through the ice fields and the freezing water. Now in survival mode, the cold water will actually damage your health. For the most part, I was able to jump across the ice, and where that wasn't possible, I used the Become Ethereal shout so that the cold temperatures would not affect me. However, if I was looking even the slightest bit down when I was swimming, I would keep going under further and further. Therefore, I had to ensure that I was looking up as much as possible. After spending a lot more time than I've actually shown there trying to get Feindal into the correct position so that I could angle myself in such a way to get across the rest of this ice field. I met the crazy man in the cube who gave me everything I needed and sent me off to Alfrond. So I actually just kind of abandoned Feindal using the Become Ethereal shout to jump down ledges and make it back to Winterhold. And this is where things got annoying. You see, Feindal had not come back when I returned to Winterhold. I even tried using the wait command, but he wasn't here, so I thought he was dead. Not to worry though, I could just use the NPCs to turn inside of the Jarl's house. I could then head over to the inn, use the NPCs to turn round and head back outside. This would put me in the correct direction to head to Alfrond. I got approached by a fugitive just outside the Alfred Glacial Ruins who spoke to me. This turned my angle, but it actually helped me. So I couldn't really see where I was going in terms of getting across the bridges into the ruins. However, I could use the Become Ethereal shout and then drop down, entering the ruins. This did take a few attempts, but eventually I got it. I don't know whether it was just frustration or general fatigue at how difficult this challenge was, but I just said f it and went on without Faendal. I was hoping I could make it through these ruins without him. I mean, at this point, I thought he was dead, so I didn't really have much choice anyway. My Atronachs were strong enough to deal with any of the enemies inside of this ruin. I was also sure that there would be chairs to sit on and things, so I could just turn my angle without him.
Yes, well, I'm afraid you were wrong.
I was able to use my Frost Atronach to stagger me so that I could get through the next door. I also had the right default angle to make it through to the next area. So far, everything was going fine. Now, instead of making my way down the long spiraling path to the bottom, I used the Become Ethereal shout to drop down to the next level, save, and then rinse and repeat until I got to the bottom. I did this because I was very regularly falling to my death, and by saving I could just reload if I did end up dying without having to start all over again. Once I made it to the bottom, I used my Atronachs to literally wipe out everything in the room, all the Thalmor down there, plus the ones that were on their way down. Now, this is why this next part is so annoying. You see, I have to head through a door that I can't see. I spent hours, and I mean literally hours in here trying to figure out how to get through the door behind me, but there was nothing I could do. So I made the decision to reload from before I even entered Alfred when I was back at Winterhold. Now there's no carriages in Winterhold, but my plan was to get Lydia, so I had to run all the way to Windhelm, using NPCs along the way to help me turn. I then caught a carriage to Whiterun, hoping to get Lydia. Guys, he's not dead. Faendal's not dead.
Surely you can't be serious.
Okay, so to make a long story short, I reloaded back into Alfred, hoping I could just use the wait command and he would appear, but he did not. I also realised that I forgot to save when I first caught up with Faendal in Whiterun, so I had to reload again from Winterhold, run all the way to Windhelm, catch a carriage to Whiterun, at which point I would pick up Faendal, and then catch a carriage back to Winterhold, and then with Faendal run back to Alfred. Now, since I'd originally loaded back into Winterhold before I even entered this dungeon, I had to redo everything that I'd done again, but it was okay because I had Faendal, which actually made this easier. I got up to the door I couldn't get through before, and actually made it through to the next area this time. I used my Atronachs to kill everything in the area, and used Faendal to change my angle to get me through here. There isn't really much else more to say about this dungeon. I smashed through Blackreach with my Atronachs, solved the puzzle, and got the Elder Scroll. Holy f***, this was a pain. So, from Alfred, it's pretty easy to run all the way back to Whiterun. While in Whiterun, I made sure to resupply on food, potions, and I even bought a fast healing spell. So, after slogging it all the way back up to the throat of the world with Faendal, I used the Elder Scroll on the Time Wound, and headed back in time to learn Dragonrend. And this is where my time spent in Skyrim compared to Oblivion really shows. I didn't know you couldn't hurt Alduin without using Dragonrend first. I mean, to be honest, has anyone really tried this? Normally you just use Dragonrend, bring him down, and then kill him. Initially, my plan was to use my Storm Atronachs to kill Alduin while I just heal repeatedly, but this obviously wasn't going to work. I then had to reload before I entered the Time Wound, and tried to angle myself with Faendal in such a way that I was looking slightly upward. However, once you come back to the present, your angle will be set at a default position, so this wasn't going to work either. But I hadn't given up yet. My next plan was to immediately talk to Faendal upon leaving the Time Wound, and then stand on the edge of the mountain and hope that Alduin would fly by, at which point I could use Dragonrend on him. Holy shit, I got him. My character's freezing at this point, and it's really difficult for me to see what the hell is going on. However, I brought him down to the ground and used my Storm Atronox to just repeatedly attack him. I could heal quicker than he was damaging me, and as long as I kept using Dragon Rend, I knew I'd be fine. Okay, I might have spoke too soon there. I was, however, repeatedly saving throughout this fight. To be honest, this fight was an absolute mess. Honestly, I think I spent more time looking at the character menu, swapping between my highborn ability, potions, summons, and healing, than I did actually fighting Alduin. My Storm Atronox was just there in the background hacking away at him while I frantically went through the character menu over and over again trying to stay alive. It was just a rinse and repeat process of scrambling for survival and saving occasionally so that I hadn't lost my progress. A good few minutes and a good few potions later and Alduin had finally been defeated. Now, it certainly wasn't pretty how I had to beat him, but the job got done, so I'm happy with that. So this next part is normally long and drawn out, however, I am going to condense this as quickly as possible. My next job is to negotiate a peace treaty between the Stormcloaks and the Empire so that we can trap a dragon at Dragon's Reach. Now you guys know how I'm doing this, and you know I have Faendal, so I'm not going to bother explaining this, but basically I have to run down to Whiterun, speak to the Jarl, head back up Hrothgar, speak to the Greybeards, then back down to Whiterun again, catch a carriage to Solitude and Windhelm to speak to the Jarls. Then, after all that, I have to head back up to Hrothgar to host the peace treaty agreement. Interesting side note, if you don't touch any of the controller sticks, then the camera will just start spinning around your character, which I thought was pretty interesting, because you can even engage in dialogue while the camera is just spinning round. So, my last task is to effectively call a dragon called Odahviing, fly to Skuldafn, and enter Southernguard. I would love to tell you it was this straightforward, but it was never going to be. You see, yes, I can use Faendal to make it into Whiterun, into Dragon's Reach, and even to trap the dragon. No issue there. However, once you get to Skuldafn, you are stuck in third-person view. Now, this is not necessarily an issue, however, it is very annoying when I have been playing the entire game in first person to now be locked in a third-person view with no way to change that. And yes, it is also very possible to make it through much of Skuldafn, even without Faendal. I can, of course, just run past certain enemies, and any enemies that can't be passed by, I can just finish off with my Atronox. Solving the puzzles without moving the camera isn't too difficult either. However, there is one room in Skuldafn that, level dependent, will have a Draugr Lord, Draugr Overlord, Draugr Deathlord, whatever you want. Either way, he has an ebony claw that I need to open a door. And unfortunately, I can't open the door because I can't look at the door. You see, there are 3 things that you have to move and then put the ebony claw inside to open it. I'd come so far now, and yet I'd fallen short at the last hurdle. I had an idea about what to do for this, although I wasn't really sure if it was going to work. It's quite similar in a fashion to what I did with Oblivion. I tried using my Atronox to stagger me so that I could kind of target the door, but that just didn't work. I spent a lot of time in here trying to work out what to do, but this just wasn't possible. You see, I had nothing that could knock me over or change my angle because you don't have Faendal inside of Skuldafn. So I was going to have to find a way of turning my character without moving the camera, and the answer lay in Solstheim of all places. How I actually managed to do this was I reloaded the save before I actually got onto Odahviing and flew to Skuldafn. I then left Dragon's Reach and caught a carriage to Windhelm. After this, me and Faendal travelled to Solstheim, where I killed a couple of Netches collecting their Netch jelly. Now this is important because Netch Jelly has a paralysis effect. I think you can see where I'm going with this. Once I collected the Netch Jelly, I made it back to Dragon's Reach and flew to Skuldafn. I then once again made it up to the room with the Ebony Claw, and after collecting the Ebony Claw I consumed the Netch Jelly, which would paralyse my character, knocking me over. Now it did take a few attempts, but eventually he stood up facing the way that I wanted him to, and I was able to get through this door. And one of the great things about the portal to Sovngarde is you don't actually have to kill the Dragon Priest. You can just run into it before he closes it. I was able to take out Sun with my Aetronox and made it into the Hall of Heroes. Now, the annoying thing about the Hall of Heroes is you cannot sit on any of the chairs, and when you talk to the characters, your camera angle does not move. Therefore, I was stuck facing one direction and could not leave. Not to worry though, because I had one more Netch Jelly. Now, this took several attempts. I had to repeatedly eat the Netch Jelly, and then hope that I would stand up facing the door to leave. Eventually, I got the angle I needed to follow the heroes of Sovngarde outside so that we could fight Alduin. And the final battle against Alduin was a lot less messy than the first time I fought him. It was extremely difficult to hit him with Dragon Rend. It took me a lot of attempts, like a good 20 minutes worth before I actually hit him. Once I brought him down though, I saved the game so that I couldn't f*** it up, and then just allowed the heroes of Sovngarde to absolutely destroy him. I summoned Aetronox and kept using Dragon Rend on him. I could repeatedly heal, and I could heal more than he was damaging me, so this fight went really, really well. And at long last, beat the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim without moving the camera. I am never playing this f***ing game again. No guys, I'm joking, I love this game. But seriously though, this challenge was absolutely soul-destroying. It was fun because, well, this is such a stupid way to play the game. But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed having a really difficult challenge, and I hope you guys did too. I mean, I'm assuming if you actually made it this far that you did, but let me know in the comments. I'd say the hardest part about this challenge is basically just how long things actually take to do. When I edit my videos, I try to get to as much of the point as possible, but the amount of time I actually spent trying to do this is literal weeks. And finally, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of you who have been following the channel, past, present, and future. A couple of months ago, I released an Oblivion challenge video to see if I could beat Oblivion without moving the camera, and the support and feedback from that video was absolutely overwhelming. The channel grew from that one video than it has in the past 4 years at least, and I was absolutely blown away by the feedback and support from you guys. It really does mean a lot, and I hope to make more videos that you guys enjoy in the future. And finally guys, I'd just like to say thank you for watching today. Please like, subscribe and all that good stuff. Leave any comments if you do have any, and I will see you guys next time. Take care.